Now, you may or may not know this, but there is a group of men that meets on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday mornings at 5:30 at one of the local schools in the parking lot to work out. And some of those people are actually in the room here. So it's a pretty amazing thing. If you are interested in that, you can just go and then let them know that Mike and I sent you, and you'll get 80% off your first 3 months. Which it's free, so whatever. But okay. There are several guys in the room that attend this particular thing. Now, there's two words that come to my mind when I hear about these individuals. The first word is devoted. Because I'm telling you, it takes some devotion to do what they are doing. The second word that I think of is insanity. So I'm for sure it's the former, and there may be a little bit of the second as well. Now, this morning in the text, we're going to talk about devotion. We're going to talk about devotion specifically to Jesus. And so if you have a Bible, I'd love for you to turn to Matthew chapter 12. We're going to be looking at verses 38 to 50 this morning as we finish up our Kingdom Collision teaching series. This teaching series is really looking at the kingdom of heaven and how the kingdom of heaven collides with the kingdom of this world. And this morning, we're going to kind of look at this topic of devotion. I want to give you kind of the big idea of where we're going this morning so that you know, and then we're going to kind of look at it in three parts. The big idea is this. Belief is the place where devotion begins. Belief is the place where devotion begins. And I would argue not only is it the place where devotion begins, but it's also the place where devotion grows. And so in every case where you find people devoted to something, there are beliefs that are behind that devotion. And that's actually where I want to spend our time this morning. Now, Matthew chapter 12, verses 38 to 50, Jesus is continuing on in this discussion and dialogue. He has disciples, but he has the Pharisees and the teachers of the law that he is talking with. And so this first section we see here in verses 38 to 42, devotion to the Lord involves trusting him and not having to have these constant signs from him demonstrating his power in order to be devoted to him. Now, Matthew chapter 12, verse 38, here's what the text says. Then some of the Pharisees and teachers of the law said to him, "Teacher, we want to see a sign from you." Now, this was kind of a request. It was maybe even a demand on the part of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. This is particularly interesting for a couple of reasons. Number one, the Pharisees and the teachers of the law combined together, they came together to make this request of Jesus. It's the real first time that we actually see them working together in the entire book of Matthew because they didn't really get along very well. It's kind of like Steelers fans and Bengals fans getting together to make a joint request. I don't know what you would unite about because, I guess that would be maybe against the Browns or, no, it wouldn't be. And the Browns are a terrible football team, so nobody really cares about them. So actually, Ryan's not here, so he can't defend that. But the point is that there's two groups of people that don't necessarily work together that were working together in this moment. They were uniting together around the cause of Jesus, the dislike of Jesus. Because Jesus at this moment, because of Jesus' teachings, and because of the kingdom of heaven being so different than the kingdom of this world, the Pharisees and the teachers of the law were potentially going to lose their power. They were potentially going to lose their positions and their authority and everything that they had, that they valued. And so they united together against Jesus. And they make this request. They're like, Jesus, hey, why don't you show us a sign so that you can prove that you are who you say you are? Now, I would just say, on the surface, that seems like an odd request. Because these people don't like Jesus. And so if Jesus actually does what they say and shows them a legitimate sign, it's only going to be worse for them, at least in theory. So why would they do this? Why would they ask this question? Well, I think basically what's going on here, if you want to keep power, one of the ways that people like to keep power is by controlling the narrative. And so if the Pharisees and the teachers of the law can be seen as telling Jesus what to do and be seen as controlling the narrative, they can maintain their position and their power. And so they say, hey, Jesus, why don't you show us some of the power that you have? Give us a sign to prove that you are legitimate. Well, Jesus, as is typical in this teaching series, in these verses that we're seeing, Jesus takes control of the moment. They wanted to take control of the narrative, but Jesus takes control of the moment in verse 39. Here's what the text says. He answered, a wicked and adulterous generation asks for a sign, but none will be given except the sign of the prophet Jonah. For Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of a huge fish, so the Son of Man will be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. I'm going to pause and say, this is Jesus actually prophesying about how that he was going to die, be buried in a tomb for 3 days, and then he would rise from the dead. So he's given that out in this moment, though I'm not really sure that most people had any idea what he was talking about. Verse 41, the men of Nineveh will stand up at the judgment with this generation and condemn it. For they repented at the preaching of Jonah, and now something greater than Jonah is here. Again, Jesus is saying, like, I'm greater than Jonah, and I am now here. The fact that you didn't repent like the people back in Jonah's day in Nineveh repented, they're going to sit in judgment over you and condemn you. Verse 42, the queen of the south will rise at the judgment with this generation and condemn it. For she came to the ends of the earth to listen to Solomon's wisdom, and now something greater than Solomon is here. So all the wisdom that this queen of the south came, and she actually listened to Solomon, is like a real thing that happened back in the day. All that, Jesus is even greater than that too. And yet, you still want a sign from me, and yet you don't believe me, and yet you're still disbelieving. And the disbelief is really the issue. Jesus is talking to the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. They're Jewish. The group of people called the Israelites back in the Old Testament, many believed in God. Many followed God, but there were some that did not. In fact, if you have any background in the Bible, you will remember, even if you don't have a background in the Bible, you may have seen this on like a movie or something with, I think it was like Charles Heston, I'm not sure. That's way back before I was watching movies, but there was like this idea where the Israelites came out of slavery, out of Egypt. God brought them out, miraculously delivered them out, part of the Red Sea, so that they could actually come to the other side and be delivered. And yet you find in a very short period of time, a group of Israelites grumbling, whining, complaining, disbelieving in the very God who had delivered him. And this group of people was made to wander around until they died, so the next generation would then be going into the promised land. Their disbelief in that moment kept them from their devotion to God. And that idea, that mentality, that truth, that story has been seen throughout the scriptures ever since. If you're here this morning and this is like your first Sunday in church in like forever, you've never been to church before, you've never read the Bible before, you kind of get the idea that like the Bible is full of like really nice platitudes and that everybody in the Bible always obeyed God, they never did anything wrong. It's kind of like the perception you might get about the Bible. That is not true. If you get the chance to read the Bible, you'll go, oh, the Bible actually describes people that are like living in reality. Yes, that's true. That's what it does. That's why it's very relatable to us. And you see story after story. Some people believe, some people are devoted to Jesus, some people disbelieve, some people are not devoted. But the idea here is that there's a connection, a direct connection, between what you believe about God and Jesus and how you live your life. Devotion has its seed in belief. Now, there's a couple things I want to point out here specifically about the request of the Pharisees and the religious leaders as it pertains to requesting a sign. Number one, constantly requiring more signs from God, at least in their case, is really to ignore what he has already revealed. It's to ask for more proof when he's already provided a ton of proof. And so I would just want to encourage you that, like, if you're in a place this morning where you're going through it and you're in the middle of a difficult circumstance and life is not what you thought it should be, and you've asked God for a sign, I'm not at all saying that that's necessarily a wrong thing. But the idea to consistently ask for signs when God has already proved himself to you over and over and over again is to actually ignore what God has already done. And so this is a point at which the Pharisees and the teachers of the law needed to understand. A huge part of trusting God is trusting that what he reveals to us about himself is more than enough to see him as absolutely trustworthy and to believe that he is who he says he is. And so we're seeing that play out in Jesus' dialogue with the Pharisees. Ultimately, what we need to understand is that the devotion that Jesus is calling out of us needs trust in Jesus. That we will always struggle with giving devotion if we don't really trust what Jesus says. This is true in life as well. Those of you, many of you may have great bosses at work, and that's awesome. There are probably some of you that don't maybe have as great a bosses at work as other people do. And that those bosses they do not have your trust. They've done things to which they have shattered your trust. It's, by the way, the same thing that happens within relationships, between friends. It can happen within a marriage relationship where people shatter trust. And when trust is shattered, devotion to that individual tends to not be present either. And the reason for that is because the trust has been shattered. It is that belief that we talk about that is the fertile soil for devotion. The difference between people that you meet who are flawed, of which we are all flawed. Everybody in the room is flawed. I'm at the front of that list. You can talk to me for any period of time, and you'll figure that out really quickly. Colleen's in the back. She'd be happy to give you some additional information as well. But my point is that we're all flawed, but God is different than us. Jesus is different. He is not flawed. He is fully and completely worth our trust. Now, a second thing about this request that the Pharisees and the scribes, or the teachers of the law, make, constantly requiring more signs from God in order to continue to trust him, actually turns us from being God-centered to being man-centered. If we have to constantly have whatever we want in order to follow God, guess who's at the center of that universe? It is no longer God who is at the center. We have placed ourselves in the center, and we're asking God to revolve around us, giving us the proper amount of signs that we have, however many signs that requires. And generally speaking, the amount of signs that requires is one more than there currently exists. And so we have turned God into, Christian Smith wrote this a little while back. It's called moral therapeutic deism, the idea that we believe in God, but God really exists so that we get what we want, that he's our therapist. He gives us everything that we need. He doesn't challenge us. He doesn't do anything that might be negative toward us. And so this kind of moral therapeutic deism is a substitute for actually genuine Christian faith. And Jesus confronts that type of mentality with the Pharisees and the teachers of the law here. God, if you do things on my terms, maybe I will trust in you. And maybe if that's where you are this morning, I want to politely and kindly say that I've actually been there several times in my life, even as a follower of Jesus. I would just politely say that to you that the best thing for you and the best thing for me is that we are not at the center of our universe. And that when Jesus gets put at the center, we actually start to flourish. We'll talk about that a little bit more a little later. Now, there's the second part to this text, which is verses 43 to 45. And this particular portion is teaching us that turning away from evil itself doesn't automatically mean that you are devoted to the truth. And the end result of this can be worse than the first. Jesus says this, when an impure spirit comes out of a person, it goes through arid places seeking rest and does not find it. Then it says, I will return to the house that I left. And when it arrives, it finds the house unoccupied, swept clean, and put in order. And then it goes and takes with it 7 other spirits more wicked than itself, and they go in and live there. And the final condition of that person is worse than the first. This is how it will be with the wicked generation, this wicked generation. Now, we know that the idea of an impure spirit is evil. We know that the idea of having an impure spirit that actually possess a person is evil. And so when Jesus says, hey, the impure spirit comes out of a person, that evil has been removed. So it's like the absence of that evil influence. But to be clear, Jesus says that good itself is not simply the absence of evil, but it is the replacement of that evil with good. Let me say this another way too, as it relates to our belief. Belief itself isn't merely the absence of evil, it is the presence of the belief in Jesus. That's the belief that the scriptures are calling us to. And that devotion itself isn't simply devotion to the absence of evil, but it is actually devotion to Jesus himself. And so that's important, and Jesus is really trying to lay that down here. The Pharisees and the teachers of the law can say all they want about how they're ardent defenders of ardent defenders of good, but except that they're really not. They don't actually have the real good, the real belief that is necessary. Devotion isn't simply just the absence of a certain pursuit, it's also the presence of a new pursuit. One of the joys that I get to have as a pastor, and I actually think that you get to have this as well as followers of Jesus. I think it's true for all of us as followers of Jesus, is we have conversations with people who maybe are not quite over the faith line of putting their faith and trust in Jesus. They're exploring who Jesus is. They've got questions. They've got doubts. There's stumbling blocks in their lives that they're not quite over the line yet. And I hear this particular statement sometimes from people. We don't believe in Christianity itself. We might like it, but we don't actually believe in Christianity itself, or any faith for that matter. And we don't actually really have a specific set of beliefs on our own. That kind of mentality. Which is to say, in essence, what they're saying is that our belief system is really simply the absence of a certain set of beliefs, not the actual presence of something else. That's kind of the tact that the Pharisees and the teachers of the law are taking in this moment as it relates to Jesus. They're basically saying, we know you're not good, and so what we need here is the absence of you, but we don't really actually have anything present in its place. And so this is kind of the belief of the world system, the kingdom of the world colliding with the kingdom of heaven. This is actually a place where we see this. And by the way, I would just simply say to people who present themselves as kind of having this like third-party approach to the belief systems of this world, which is to say that we don't believe in Jesus, but we don't really have anything else. I would simply say that devotion itself, everybody is devoted to something. Nobody is in a position of like, well, I'm just not devoted to anything. Like it's just not how it works. It's not. Now, potentially when people are telling you, hey, we don't believe in Jesus, but we don't really have another belief system, what they probably mean is that they're devoted to a belief system that hasn't been thoroughly vetted or that they haven't really actually thought through. But every one of us is actually devoted to a particular belief system. And so that's Jesus' point with the Pharisees and the scribes. Like, you can't just be absent of something and that's your belief system. That you actually have to pursue something as well. And so this devotion based on belief is a devotion to something. You have to turn to something. In Jesus' case, he's asking people to turn to him, to become a follower of him. And the devotion in this moment is a response to Jesus and the fact that he lived a sinless life, died on the cross, was buried and rose from the dead, did all that for you and me, and that when we put our faith and trust in him alone, we're forgiven permanently, completely, forever. And that then is something worth devoting our lives to. Now, there's a third piece to this text in verses 46 to 50. And the third piece to this text is actually helping us understand that as we are devoted to Jesus, we are going to find the importance of being in community with other people who are pursuing Jesus as well. And that's in verses 46 to 50. Jesus says it in a very shocking type of way. Verse 46, while Jesus was still talking to the crowd, his mother and brothers stood outside wanting to speak to him. And someone told him, your mothers and brothers are standing outside and they are waiting to speak to you. And he replied to them, who is my mother? And who are my brothers? And pointing to his disciples, he said to them, here are my mother and my brothers. For whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and sister and mother. If this is the first time that you've actually heard this text, you're like, wait, what? What's going on here? This Jesus seems like pretty radical. Is he saying that like he has no more relationships with his mom and his dad because he has followers? That is a take on this. That is potentially how that sounds. And if you just did a quick reading of this text alone without understanding other texts, you could come to that conclusion. But there's a second way to interpret this, which includes the greater part of the scripture. You see, in the book of James, we realize that James is the half-brother of Jesus. He becomes the leader in Jerusalem. He becomes a content supplier of the text. And he becomes this person who is actually a worshiper of his brother. And there's a good connection and relationship that exists there. In John chapter 19, as Jesus is on the cross, he looks down at John and he says, hey, please take care of my mother. It's John 19, 25 to 29. And so you can see within these couple passages that Jesus cares deeply for his relatives, that he acknowledges them as his relatives, that he sees them as such. And so this idea that Jesus is disowning his family here is not really a good interpretation. But the second interpretation is not so much that Jesus is ditching his family, his immediate family, but that he is helping us to see that within the kingdom of heaven, there is a greater family as well. And so he's not trying to minimize his relationship with mom and dad. He's trying to elevate the idea that those who put their faith and trust in Jesus are literally his family. And that's a pretty comforting thought. And in fact, on this journey that you and I have, as we are experiencing tastes of the kingdom of heaven now, we are experiencing even more of that when we do that in the connection of the community of believers. We need each other, and that in the rubbing shoulders with other people who are pursuing Jesus with their lives, we experience growth. We are devoted in ways that we would not be devoted without those people. And so the community of believers becomes something important in Jesus' mind and a key as we seek to follow Jesus, as we are devoted to him. Now, what I want to do at this moment is I want to finish up this morning just by giving you 3 simple takeaways from the text that I think will be helpful in our lives this week. Number 1, and I think this is really important, you cannot get around this in the pages of the scripture. The scriptures emphasize the importance of belief. What you believe matters. And so I want to encourage you to pursue belief in Jesus. One of the things that is very concerning to me, and this is particularly true of those of you who have grown up around church, is that we get the idea that the goal is morality. The goal is not morality. Morality is not bad. The goal is not morality. The goal is faith in Jesus. The goal is the forgiveness and the joy that comes from Jesus alone. And that is not something that we earn. It's something that's given to us all because Jesus earned it for us. And so pursue belief in Jesus. He's after your belief. And if you truly believe in him, devotion will flow straight from your belief. Number 2, remember Jesus is completely devoted to his followers. The greatest thing about Christianity is that it's not about us. The greatest thing about Christianity is that it's about Jesus. And yet, Jesus pursues us. Jesus is devoted to us. The sinless Son of God is devoted to people like you and me, who sometimes get up in the morning and we decide not to be devoted to Jesus that day, or we're not devoted to our family. We're not devoted to, we're not going to, feed our dog or whatever. Like, we're just out on life in general. Jesus is never out on us. He is always in on us. There is never not a time when Jesus isn't devoted to you. And that makes Christianity way better than any other belief system that you could possibly think of. Because in every other belief system, it's about your rigor and your devotion to get to Jesus or to get to the God, that whoever that God is. In Christianity, it's Jesus who has shown his devotion to us. It's Jesus who has come to us. It's Jesus who has initiated. It's Jesus who's paid the price. It's Jesus who gives grace. It's Jesus who gives mercy. It's Jesus who gives hope. It is always about Jesus, and that Jesus is completely devoted to you. And that's mildly exciting. 3, pursue Jesus in a community of followers. Now, there are times in our lives, and there's been times in my life, where I have needed another follower of Jesus to encourage me. Sometimes it's my wife, oftentimes it's my wife, but sometimes it's other people that I've rubbed shoulders with who know me well enough to speak to me in a loving and kind and encouraging way with the truth that I need. And so throughout the ages, churches have tried to figure out ways and modes of being able to connect people at deeper levels. And so we're not saying that this is the only way, but the way that we do it at the Church at Hebron is through something called small groups, where we meet. Pets groups meeting right now. There's some groups that meet on-site on Sunday, and then there's groups that meet off-site during the week. But we have 5 groups that we are currently meeting, and we're just using these groups as a means to helping each other be known and get to know other people. And I will say that the group that I'm a part of, I love deeply. It's a great group, but it's a group of people that know me, and I know them, and we get to encourage each other. And because I'm the pastor, I actually know some of the other groups as well, and I know that same thing's happening in those other groups too. I want to invite you to get to a place where you are known and loved, even though you are flawed. I think one of the big things is that, like, a lot of us try not to be involved in a small group because, one, maybe we've had a bad experience with a group, and I understand that. People will always let you down, but there is this sense that, I don't mean that, that's such a fatalistic way to say that. Come to our groups, you're going to get let down. But what I mean by that is that we're flawed. There will be times when we disappoint each other. But the point is that I've been far more encouraged by allowing myself to be known by people than I ever have been discouraged in that process. And these groups are confidential groups where people are for you, and they are for your spiritual growth, and they're for you pursuing Jesus. And I wouldn't trade it for the world. And I want to encourage you, I want to invite more people into that process. And I would say this, even if you're maybe you haven't crossed the faith line yet, you're exploring who Jesus is in your life, and you're like, I'm not sure I'm there yet. We would love for you to come and be a part of those groups, because this is a place where you can safely and openly share your doubts and ask questions and know that you are loved and not judged in that environment. And so I want to say, like, lean into the community that God gives to us as a church. Well, you may not drive by the elementary school at 5:30 on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday mornings and see these people. But if you do, you can wave and say hello. Some Mike and I said hello. Hi, that's as close as we're ever going to get. And you can think about their devotion and remember that God is calling us to a life of devotion as well, based on faith, based on what he has done for us, knowing that he is completely devoted to us. Let's pray.